Hey, this is Madara 30K here with another tier list video. Today we'll be going over all the DPS characters. I'll be joined by Liam.
Hey guys, what's up? Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we got a lot of characters to get through, so let's start banging through them. First off, Alarak. I'd put him right in the middle, C tier. I think he's probably underrated. Recently got a buff that made him a lot more viable. Pretty bad macro, but overall team fight power is pretty high.
Yeah, I agree. I think super undervalued actually, just a very high skill cap hero. If you're good at him, definitely not a bad hero.
Yeah, agreed.
C seems good.
Okay, so next is Asmo. Probably D tier. Really good macro, really bad team fight. Can probably cheese out some wins in Storm League, but good luck doing much against a comp that knows how to play against an Asmodean.
Yep, you pretty much said it perfectly. Definitely great macro, but against a good team, they're just gonna make sure you can't rotate, and then you're not gonna get any stacks. So that's why we don't see him. Definitely, probably D or F. I'm fine with either.
Dang, I'll put him in D because he can still get those cheese wins.
Yeah.
Next, Cassia. I'd say B tier. She was really strong, but people learned how to play against her, and she's been nerfed a bit. Say she's a good last pick. If they don't have any hard counters into her, she'll generally be pretty good.
Yeah, agreed. I think she is a little undervalued right now. I feel like not many people play her anymore because of the nerfs, but the nerfs didn't hit her too hard. She can definitely be strong in the right scenario. So, yeah, I think B is good for her.
All right. Cho. I mean, he's a tank, but he doesn't have damage to be a DPS really. I'd say D tier. We don't see Cho or Gal very often, but I think they're very underrated. I think their late game team fight is incredible, and if the enemy team doesn't have the macro to punish it, then he's just really strong. But if a team does know how to play against Cho'Gall, pretty darn bad. So I'd put him in D tier.
Yeah, I think that the biggest problem with Cho'Gall is like you can't last pick him obviously because he's 2-1. So there's gonna be somebody's gonna pick a counter into the Cho'Gall, and any counter into Cho'Gall is gonna be very like bad for him. So that's why he's pretty much never played. So yeah, I think D or F, either or.
Dang, F for Cho'Gall?
We could do D. I think he is a little undervalued. His team fight value is strong for sure.
I just know if I put him in F, there's a certain HeroesHearth caster that will be on our backs.
True,
Next,
can't do that.
Chromie. I think S tier. She's insane damage, really good macro, really good crowd control from a DPS slot, just overall insane.
Yeah, I would before this season I'd probably put her in A, but like I used to think that, certain dive heroes can kind of counter her, but after seeing you play her a bunch, I don't think there's really any hard counters. So, yeah, insane burst damage, insane utility, vision control, time traps. Both her ultimates are very strong. I think S tier is fair.
Yeah, I'd say she can even sort of counter her own counters with how long she can protect herself with her stasis and her clocks. It
Yeah,
just makes it so hard to get on top of her.
definitely have to be good at her, but if you are, definitely S tier.
Yep. Next is Deathwing, personal favorite of mine. I'd probably put him around C right now. I think he's very underrated, but I think if you can get him in a last pick, and the enemy team doesn't counter you, then it's just a 1v9 hero. But if you do pick him early, you're probably going to get countered and have a really rough game.
Yeah, I agree completely. I've been a Deathwing believer for a long time, but he is only a last pick hero in my opinion. But if you do pick him in the last pick in the right scenario, definitely can be strong. So I'd probably say C as well. Yeah.
All right, next is Falstad. I think a little underrated right now. I'd probably put him A. I think the macro that he brings is insanely good. And if you aren't getting pressured by like a Zeratul or a Genji that can one-shot you, you can just end games by yourself. And not to mention Gust, especially at level 20, is just broken.
Yeah, agreed. Gust is such a game changer. Level 20 it's broken, but even once you get at level 10, it's a free disengage or a free engage. The global factor is huge. I think he's kind of a last pick hero, similar to Deathwing, because there are big counters to him, such as Zeratul Genji, really anything that can dive him. Unless you have a very specific, like Brightwing, for example, can protect him from those heroes,
Hmm.
in which his value goes up. So, yeah, I think he's very strong. if he is that last pick, which he should be. So yeah, I think A is good.
I also think his build diversity is pretty good. I think auto attack build just runs towers down into the ground, and Q build's really good team fight damage, so pretty
Yep,
flexible as well.
lots of damage in team fights.
Phoenix. I'd probably put him around the same as Cassia. If you're not into too many hard counters, then he can generally be pretty decent. But if you're first picking him, then you're probably gonna get countered and not have too fun of a time.
Yeah, I'm actually I've always been a big Phoenix believer. I think Phoenix is very slept on right now.
Dang.
Um, with that being said, we don't really ever see it from anybody, so it's hard for me to put him in B. I'd probably be leaning C because I don't know, nobody really plays him, but I do think he is underrated. We could do B or C. I think B might be a little generous just because really nobody plays him at that I know of anyway,
I mean, you're
currently.
just throwing massive disrespect on Gottfeld's name right now.
Okay. Well, he did retire recently, didn't he?
Pretty true. Maybe it was the Phoenix that made him retire. I'm down to move down to C then.
Yep, sounds
Uh,
good.
I mean, Gaul goes along with Cho, same exact
Yep.
reasons. Gazlo DPS tier. I'd probably put him F or D. I think. I mean, he doesn't. He just doesn't do as much as the other bruisers do from a DPS slash flex perspective. Uh, he's obviously like even a low tier offlaner, so probably just not really
Yeah.
shining anywhere right now.
Yeah, I talked a lot about him in the offlane video, but I think his CC can be strong, especially post 20. You have the bonus ease, and Gravel Bomb is obviously very strong. His macro is pretty good, but really the biggest thing is just his numbers are too low. They don't do enough. So I'd probably say around D. I don't think he's an F tier. I'd put him around D.
Okay, I can agree with that. Genji, I think he's S tier right now. I think he's the best dive assassin in the game. He has so much mobility, especially with this newest buff that he got. I mean, he can just be wherever he wants.
Yeah, I think Genji is very very broken right now. Like his new build with the like D build, you get the spell damage at 7 plus the dodge, like just a
hmm
free dodge, and then once you scale up the shin gun stacks, you can solo kill keeps by yourself just by sniping them with shin guns. You can roam freely. He's very good in team fights. Very good at macro. He doesn't really have any weakness except for point and click, but you can play around that even.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think S tier.
Say his only weakness is probably low wave clear, but you can pair that with any DPS that is wave clear, and he's set for the rest of the game. So
Yeah.
yeah, very strong character right now. Greymane, I'm a very big Greymane non-believer. I'd probably put him around C or B. I mean, he's an okay right clicker, but when Blaze and Joe are just so high prio right now, playing Greymane into either of those feels like a nightmare.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Greymane used to be very strong. I mean, he's still pretty good at the macro aspect, like doing camps, split pushing, especially if you have like an Anubrak with you or something, you can
hmm
split push. But I do think in team fights he's just so weak in the current meta. There's so many strong heroes that punish auto attackers like Joanna, like Blaze, like Urel, like anything that blinds. It just makes team fights really hard for him. So I would probably put him around C.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put him as low as you want me to. I hate playing Greymane personally.
He's not that
Gul'dan.
bad,
I mean, he's not that
but yeah,
bad, but he just doesn't feel too great right now.
yeah, I agree.
I think Gul'dan's honestly slept on right now. I think very few people have tried to play him, but I think his Horrify ult combined with his insane burst damage is just actually incredible, and no one's really picking it ever. I also think, I mean, the counters to him is dive him, but with Horrify, I think he can even kind of outplay the counters to a point.
I agree Gul'dan's a little underrated. I think his biggest problem is there's so many heroes that really can punish him. Like if I'm playing like a Urel or a Blaze or a Leoric or a Hogger even, like I know that if I see Gul'dan, I can get on him and I
Yeah.
can solo kill him and he can't stop me. So that's most of the meta offlaners are just gonna destroy him. I mean tanks like a Nubrak or something or Diablo both punish him. I think that's why he's not very highly valued. I'd probably put him in C tier though. I think in the right match he can be strong, especially like versus double support because he does the big damage similar to Mephisto,
Yeah.
and Horfai is obviously always strong.
Yeah, I guess you're kind of right. He's like a really good consistent damage mage, but more drawbacks than some of the rest.
No mobility,
Hanzo,
yeah.
yeah, no mobility really sucks for him. Hanzo, I'd say A tier right now. He's really high prio, especially in EU, I believe. A number of talent diversities you can go here. You can go Q build, W build, Dragon Strike, Arrow. I think even like both 16s are really strong. Just a really good general range DPS that has mobility, wave clear, camping, and good teamfight damage.
Yeah, I'm actually one of the biggest Hanzo believers. I think if you're good at Hanzo, I think he's the best hero in the game. I think
Dang.
Scatter is absolutely broken if you're
Yeah,
good
it
at him. You
is.
can just one-shot people. Landing Qs is pretty easy. I mean, it's a high skill hero, but if you're good at him, I think he's absolutely insane. At 10, you get Dragon Arrow, which can just win team fights. We see it
Mhm.
constantly winning team fights.
Yeah.
I would probably put him in S. I don't really think there's huge counters. I mean, you can dive him, but he has jump. He has ways to peel for himself. He can just turn and kill you if you get too close to a wall. Uh, but we can do A or S depending on what you're feeling. You are the Hanzo aficionado, so
I would love to put Hanzo in S, but I think he just feels like he brings less to the table than someone like Chromie or Genji right now. Uh, I think the
that's
thing that
fair.
really separates them is just their ability to control the map as well as provide so much in team fights. So I think that's
Yeah,
the main distinction between the two.
Hanzo can backdoor some bosses, but
That's
aside
kind
from
of true,
yeah,
actually.
we can put him in A though.
Illidan, I'm gonna drop him in F. Pretty bad right now, in every role.
It's kind of like Greymane in the sense that like there's a lot of meta counters to auto attackers, so especially Illidan as a DPS, I don't really see him like that. I think if he has a place, it's in the off lane, and it's
And he's a
very
last pick.
situational. But as a DPS, unless you're running like an Abathur comp, which was like very niche, and it's just I'm not huge into it. I agree. I think he's F.
Yeah. Imp, I think he's probably. I'd probably put him B tier right now. Actually, I think he's like budget Thrall kinda, where he can be that 4-man bruiser who has really good like frontline damage, really good CC, pretty good peeling as well if you need that.
Yeah, I agree. I love Imperius and as a DPS. I don't think he's good in the main tank. I don't think he's great in the offlane, except for very specific scenarios like on BOE or something. But as a DPS, I think he's very good. His burst damage is strong. His CC is strong. CC follow up. He's very good at killing frontliners, so that's sort of his niche, kind of like Thrall. So yeah, I'd probably put him around B.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think DPS slash flex is definitely his best role right now. Jaina, I'd probably put C with Gul'dan. More burst damage than Gul'dan, but like the same problems with him. No mobility, and with her even less range, so it's even more dangerous to step up to do your damage. I think she can be good as a last pick if it looks like a really good Jaina game, but she's just too fragile to be playing out there right now.
Yeah, I agree. Very similarly to Gul'dan, as all the meta offlaners, I love to see a Jaina because I know I can just kill her. The one thing she has that's like very strong is the slows are good, and then you have icy veins, which I think is very very strong. The CDR, you have ice block to protect you, but you have to stack that up a bit. Just the no mobility factors, similar to Gul'dan. Uh, it's really hurts her. So yeah, I'd probably say C.
Okay, I mean Junkrat S tier. He's been perma banned for the first 2 months of CCL so far.
Yep.
I mean he's just ridiculous right now.
He brings everything. Wave clear, camp clear. Traps are just they break the game.
Yeah.
um, there's not much to say about him. He's definitely S tier.
Yep. KT. I honestly think he's. I mean, same as these other mages. Almost exact same problem. No mobility. Very easy to get dove. I think in this case, he even does less consistent damage than the other two ahead of him. Just a sad time to be a low range mage with no mobility.
Yep, agreed. Pretty much exact same thing as Jaina and Gul'dan. They have their spots if it's like a last pick in the right scenario, but other than that, uh,
Just
not great. So
mediocre
I'd
at
probably put
best,
him in
yeah.
C tier as a, very niche as the C tier is.
Speaking of low range mages with no mobility, we come to the worst one of all. I mean,
Yep.
let's give him no mobility, low range, and you have to hit pretty hard skill shots if you ever want to deal damage. Combine that with you have to get 30 stacks to actually do damage. Uh,
Yep. And if you're against a good team, they're not gonna give you those stacks, or they're just gonna kill you off off cooldown because you don't have anything to survive.
yeah,
Probably a D, maybe even F tier. I think if you're really good at him, you can do some cool things. So that's why I'd probably lean D over F.
yeah, I'd say the KTZ one tricks definitely have a place.
Agreed.
Kerrigan, I'd say C right now. I love Kerrigan personally, but she's definitely a good last pick if the enemy team doesn't have the tools required to one shot you on your go. So if you can go in and combo like their team, kill someone and survive, then it's gonna be a great Kerrigan game. But it's pretty rare that happens. So that's why I'd probably put her in C.
Yeah, I'm actually a huge Kerrigan believer. I think she's super strong. It's just you have to get those stacks on your queue, and getting those stacks is really the only downside to her, in my opinion, outside of like, slows and stuff. Getting those stacks, if you're against a good team, they're going to try to threaten you off of that, make it so you can't rotate. But if you can get those stacks, be it Storm League or maybe you have a team that's able to assist you get them, I think she's super strong when she has them. The burst damage is really good. I'd probably put her in C. I think you could argue for B if you're good at her, but I'm fine with C.
Ming, I'd say a cut above these rest, probably B tier. Generally gonna be a pretty good DPS, really high burst damage, and this time she has mobility, so obviously gonna be better than the rest of her mage counterparts. Probably one of the best burst DPS right now to follow off CC. And then the resets can also just make you into a 1v9er.
Yep, the burst is insane. The only downside to Ming really right now is like a lot of the maps she's not strong on. So like Infernal Shrines, obviously you have the shrine getting in the way. On the right map though, in the right scenario, I think she's actually very very strong. Uh, Obviously big counters like Diablo and Anubra can be annoying, but if you pick her in the right scenario, yeah, I'd probably say B tier. Could even be A tier on certain maps like BOE, but B tier seems good.
Yeah. Lily, I mean, I talked about her a little bit on the healer tier list. She's not really a healer, she's more of a DPS, but I'd still put her in D. Uh, Her numbers are just way too small. She can kind of be annoying and hard to kill, but that's just like a Walmart brand tracer, is really what she is.
Yeah, I think her I think her niche is in double support, um, as the like another DPS, but she can sort of help the carry like a Vala, for example. Versus like a certain comp that relies solely on auto attacks, I think it can be okay, but there's going to be very few comps where you get that unless you're last picking it, but you can't really last pick her because you gotta hide your other picks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say D tier probably.
Yep. Lunara, I think S tier right now. I think she's getting a little bit slept on. I think she was a lot higher prio earlier on in this CCL season, but she's got really good damage, and the Wisp is absolutely insane on some maps. And on the maps that it's not absolutely insane, it's still really, really good.
Yeah, agreed. Lunara, I think the reason she's not as high prio is just because she's pretty hard to play, I would say, and not many people really like to play her, I think. But I think she is very strong. Her burst damage can be insane with leaping strikes and the Q talent. Um, she can also do very good sustain damage, obviously, with the poison and vines if it's a good vines game. Wisp changes the game. Permavision, unless you're against like a Genji, which can kind of hunt the wisp, or a tracer, but Yeah, super strong hero. Also, she has a cleanse as a DPS,
which
which
is
is like
insane.
absolutely insane. Another thing that pushes her up. I think S is fair.
And just before, I mean, it breaks my heart every time I see a Lunara go the wrong talents. Please, God, go E level 1 and go Choking Pollen level 7. Everything else is up to you. Maiev
Agreed.
next. I'd say S tier. I think Maiev's really good. It feels really hard to play against a Maiev. I'm not even completely sure what the best counters are for her. She just feels like she has insane macro, insane damage. Her ult getting a buff on like a 40-second cooldown can just be a free pick super easily. Amazing engage, CC with the pull, and super good survivability.
Yep, you pretty much said everything. Completely agree. I've always loved Maiev. I always recommend Maiev whenever playing. I think she doesn't really have any weakness. I mean, not any true weakness. She has the D to sort of jump up and avoid anything. She has insane damage. And really, I think what pushes her to the S tier is the disc. Containment disc is so broken. It's a cocoon that can't be broken. It's a silence as soon as you're out. It's a 40-second cooldown.
Yeah, super dumb.
Extremely strong. S tier in my opinion for sure.
I would say that she's by far the hardest to play of these S tiers
Yeah,
though, so you're gonna need a
that
couple games to be decent on her.
definitely extremely high skill cap.
Malthael in the DPS slot, I'd say D personally. You don't see him too much picked there, and it's only ever going to be as a last pick if they have like a Diablo and two maybe bruisers, just so you can get a lot of your value out of your trait and your percent damage healing.
Yeah, I think Malthael in the DPS slot, I think he's a bit more viable than D. I'd probably say C. I think he can really counter a lot of the meta tanks like Diablo or really any tank. The Garrosh is another example. The thing is, he's very niche, has to be last pick, kind of like Deathwing, because there are big counters to him, like really any range. For example, like Tracer, Genji, Zeratul, he can't really interact with them. He'll get bullied a lot. But if he's in the 4-man, then he has his team helping him out. His camp potential strong. I would probably put him in C tier just because I think he, in the right scenario, I think he's actually very strong.
I could say C tier, but I think yeah, definitely last pick only then.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, he can definitely be super beneficial if it looks like a great Malthael game. Medivh was kind of hard for me to figure out where to place him. He's kind of a wild card. I'd say very difficult to play, but if you're good with him, absolutely game breaking. So I'd put him in A. The portal absolutely changes the way that the game is played. I mean, you can move any of your teammates from one spot to another, which is broken. You can cancel all damage on a target for like 2 seconds, which is broken. And you can stop the entire enemy team for like 3 seconds, which is broken. And your mount lets you go over walls and not be hit, which is broken. But he has absolutely no macro, and his teamfight damage really relies on you getting stacked.
Yeah, Medivh's a tough hero to rank. Extremely high skill cap, probably the highest skill cap hero in the game, like undoubtedly in my opinion.
Yeah.
If you're good at him, I think he breaks the game. You can argue S tier, but really we don't have that many amazing Medivh players. So yeah, I think A tier is fair. There are some counters to Medivh, should be noted. Like you can out macro him kind of because obviously he has no macro. You can go for displacements to punish the portals because people get in portals. You use displacements like Malfruit, for example, or your Knock, or really any CC. Junkrat's also a good counter. So yeah, I think A tier is fair because there are those weaknesses.
Next, Mephisto. I think I'd say A tier. I'd say on the maps Tomb of the Spider Queen and Infernal Shrines, he's the best DPS on the map, undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. I think there's even some maps that you can still pick him that he's really good on. Absolutely farms double support comps, farms anything that wants to team fight you and doesn't want a macro, because he'll just about win every team fight if you can protect him late game. His 16 and 20 spikes with W build are atrocious. And I think if you can get away with shield at 4, which makes you a little bit weaker in the early game, you're just an absolute powerhouse by the time you get around to the late game.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I think of Mephisto, I think there's really only one thing you have to consider is you have to look, do they have a Gorge? Do they have a Cocoon? Do they have a Time Loop? Those are really the only things that I'm scared
Yeah.
about when I'm considering a Mephisto, because if they don't have those, I think if you're good at him, he just is absolutely insane, wins every team fight. So any map that has any team fights that are gonna like determine the outcome of the game, I usually think he's insanely strong. So yeah, I'd probably say A tier as well, as long as you're not against one of those big counters.
Yeah, hard agree. Nazebo, I'd say D tier personally. Um, kind of a meme pick in one way. He has really good macro. His team fight damage is a little bit subpar, I'd say, until you get to 20 with your vial infection stacks. Then it's actually pretty darn decent. But no mobility, pretty low range, and even though you get a lot of bonus health from your trait, it's normally not enough to save you in a team fight if you get gone on. And also, like, I'd say he's actually pretty difficult to play. Getting good value out of the zombie walls, and if you ever miss a spider, your team fight value instantly goes down to 0.
Yeah, I don't personally like Nazebo much at all. I think his one strength is the spider build. You go spider build, you do really high damage, which is like pretty much his only strength in my opinion. Ravenous Spirit can be, in certain situations, can be strong if there's like no counter. But the thing about Nazebo is I feel like you have to really stack him, which means you gotta sort of just go for the minion waves until you reach level 20, which can be viable on like Tomb of the Spider Queen. It's like the one situation where it can work, but even then you're gonna get really pushed in until that level 20, which I think they can really punish the fact that you're not level 20 with Nazebo and sort of just bully you really hard, which is why I agree. I think he's pretty low, probably D tier.
Yeah, I think if he really has to crutch on his teammates early game to get any value, so kind of a poor pick. Nova, personally, I think C tier. Uh, I think she is one of the most slept on characters in the game. I know everyone views her mostly as a troll pick, but I think honestly I don't even think she needs to be last picked. I think as long as their tank can't jump on you, then she's pretty good in my opinion. I think she does insanely good damage, really good scouting and vision, and there's some really cool things you can do with the clone to block a lot of abilities. I'd say she's actually got a really high skill cap, but her macro is absolutely horrendous, and she is pretty prone to getting dove upon in one shot. So I can fully understand if you'd like to move her down a little bit.
Yeah, the thing about Nova, like I think in team fights, Nova can actually provide pretty good value. The clone can do some cool things like block hooks or any skill shots or maybe eat Junkrat traps. Like it has those niches it can do. Her team fight value is pretty strong, but we talked about previously how Genji has no macro. Well, Nova has 10 times worse macro than Genji. Genji can E a wave, shin gun the wave. He can do okay at clearing it. Nova cannot do anything at all macro wise, which really hurts her a lot in my opinion. Uh, it's a really big downside. But if it's like a map like Hanamura or something where macro doesn't matter, then maybe it has her niche situations. Um, yeah, I'd probably put her in D tier because of that macro. Also, she can definitely be dove. She has 0 mobility like the other mages we talked about, so very diveable. But also high skill cap. I'd probably put her in D though, personally.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm probably pretty biased when it comes to Nova, so I understand. Next is Orphea, another character I have no bias about. Um, I really want to put her in C tier. I think she's a lot better than these other mages on this tier because she has actually mobility. Really, really high team fight damage. Really, if she can get protected and she doesn't get one shot in a team fight, she provides insane value in my opinion. Pretty good macro. She can clear waves instantly. She's okay at camps. Her boss damage is really bad. but I'd say I think she's just generally one of the higher DPS, like damage DPS. Only problem is her range, which is pretty short, so she is pretty easy to punish.
Yeah, I actually I like Orphea a good amount. I think she's pretty good. She's just very high skill cap, I think, because you really have to land your skill shots. If you miss that Q, which is sort of like your mobility tool, you miss it and you're gonna get dove and punished. But if you are landing them and you're, protected by your team, she has insane burst damage. She can even do like pretty good sustain damage if you're protecting her, and she's just dishing out the skill shots. I think she can be very strong, but yeah, it's just if you miss that Q, you will die,
Yeah,
and
that's probably the biggest
it's really
problem.
just gotta land that Q. I think I could say C tier for her if you're really good at her.
Yeah, that sounds good to me then. Probius, I'd probably put him D tier. I was thinking about F, but he kind of got a little bit of a resurgence after his buffs. His macro is insanely good. He's like the only character in the game that can double soak while doing a camp. It's just that much uh, PvE damage. Only problem is in team fights, he's really, really weak unless the enemy team has no range, in my opinion. He can get poked out super easily, one shot super easily. Only really good in the team fight if you're against like a bunch of melees that need to walk into you for some reason, and you can get set up on a point really fast. But because of how limiting those conditions are, I'd probably put him down here around D.
Yeah, I think Probius is kind of a last pick only hero because if you pick him anywhere where the enemy team can respond with like a Genji or a Zarya or a really any dive, like even like a tank dive like Muradin, a Nubrak, uh, Urel, like anything that can jump on him, he's just gonna die. So you really have to last pick him, and in that scenario, I can see him being not terrible because his macro is very strong. But yeah, the team fight value is pretty low ever since the nerfs to his shields. So I'd probably put him in D. Yeah.
Next is Kira. Really fun to play, really bad. Uh, if you miss your E, you're useless in a team fight. If you hit your E and the enemy has an unstoppable, you're dead. Uh, all of her damage requires you to pretty much be going in at all times, which is kind of dangerous considering her escape has a channel time to it, which makes it feel really bad if the enemy team has a single stun on their composition.
Yeah, you pretty much said it all. Like in theory, she's a pretty good hero. Like the E is actually very strong, especially post 16 because the AoE stun. But like you said, if it gets cleansed, then you can just die. You can get chain CC'd. Your escape is a channelable escape, so you can just get CC'd out of it and die. So yeah, it just not. It's a cool hero in theory, but it just doesn't work in this game.
Yeah, it's
F
pretty
tier in
hard.
my opinion.
Raynor, I'd say D tier. I think really low DPS overall. He's semi-tanky, so he can protect himself a little bit against dive, but he just doesn't dish back damage in return very well. And some people might say if like, he goes exterminator, then he's got really really good macro, but in my opinion, there's a lot of other heroes that do good macro and can do something in the team fight. So if you're picking Raynor because he can exterminate, then I think you inted somewhere along the draft.
Yeah, I think he's a cool hero. Uh, Lots of macro with that exterminator, but like you said, other heroes can do it as well. And Raynor really doesn't do enough in team fights. Um, he can kind of just get dove and die. His Q build is sort of the one redeeming factor, but it's just not enough. His numbers are too low. That he was nerfed a while back, but numbers are just too low in my opinion. So yeah, I think D tier, unfortunately.
Poor Raynor.
Yeah.
Next is Rexar. I'd say he's a little bit worse than Imperius for a bruiser in the DPS slot. I think his CC is better because of Misha, but I think his overall damage and uh, ability to make space is a lot worse than Imperius. And when your bear dies, it it makes the hero a lot weaker for a pretty long time.
I'm actually a pretty big Rexar believer. I feel like
Ooh.
Misha is super strong. It's like a safe stun, which can be followed up by like burst damage, like Li Ming, for example. Other chain CC, it's like a free CC setup with no risk.
Mhm.
His damage is actually pretty high, his auto attack damage, and his both his ults are very strong. The boars, especially post 20, does like the root effect, can be very good. The one downside to him is if you get dove, if you get knocked in somehow by like a Urel or something, you'll just die. You don't really have anything to get out. You have feign death, but you can only feign death for so long. You'll die when you get up. So yeah, I think probably C tier, just because of that very, bad downside.
Yeah. I agree, C tier. I just have to ask you. You said both his ults are very strong.
Okay, I meant boars is strong.
Okay, okay. I'm
Good
just making
correction.
sure. Yeah,
Good
yeah,
correction.
yeah. Samro, I'd say in the DPS slot, probably D, maybe F tier. I think he's only pickable in the off lane and very rarely. If you're like a Samro god and you have the APM of maybe 500, then yeah, you can probably 1v9 with him. But if you're spending that much time to get that great at Samro, then you probably could have mastered like 20 other heroes at that point. And if you haven't gotten that mastery on Samro, then he's going to feel really hard and difficult to play. His wave clear is kind of bad unless you go Bladestorm, and I think if you're going Bladestorm on Samro, then he's actually useless at that point. All he does is clear waves.
Yeah, you pretty much said it all. I think the only time where you're gonna really bring Samro to a team fight is if you have an Abathur.
Mm.
If you don't have an Abathur, you can't really bring him to a team fight. I don't think he's very strong in the team fights. So he's really just a macro bot. You just macro all game, and if you're in like a winning matchup, for example, like Leoric, you can kind of bully, but the other offlaners you can't really bully, which is why he's not very meta. You have like Urel, Blaze, they're just gonna farm him. He doesn't bring much to team fights, like I just said, so yeah, probably D tier. Um, like you said, if you're very good at him, you can sort of abuse the macro, but just not good enough.
Yeah. Hammer, regrettably, seeing a lot of popularity these days. I'd still put her around B myself. I think if she's not into too many counters, then she can be really good. But I think there's a lot of things that do counter her, and if you have one of those on your team, then you should be decent into Hammer. I think a lot of it comes down to experience against playing a Hammer, or maybe playing as Hammer. Just not getting surprised by the fact that she's going to be cheesing your early towers, and sometimes like just sacrificing them to make value elsewhere can oftentimes shut her down because she really likes being in control and having people respond to her while she's just getting a lot of value by herself. But I think if you can get around that and you just have enough experience into her, then she's probably not going to be as great.
Yeah, I agree. I think of Hammer similar to Deathwing kind of, just because I think you really need to last pick her. Um, other people might disagree, like Oxygen, but I think that there are so many counters to her. If you're not last picking her, you're gonna get countered, and you're gonna constantly play against that counter in team fights, and even in when you're trying to split push, the counter is gonna be following you around. So unless you're like starting out your bands with like both counters right off the bat, and then 2-3ing maybe that can work sometimes, but usually the other team is always looking out for that, at least in the current meta. So yeah, I think if you last pick her, she can be game breaking, similar to Deathwing. So yeah, probably B tier, just because I think even if you are into the counters, she can kind of provide more than Deathwing because he gets hard countered. But yeah, probably B tier, maybe even C tier in my opinion, but we could do B.
Yeah, I'm down to leave her at B. I feel like we'll have some angry Europeans if we bring her lower than that.
Yeah.
Sylv, I'd say S tier, right up there with Lunara. I'd say they're almost interchangeable. Their team fight damage is really solid. Their macro is really good. Thing with Sylvanas is her trait lets her get really good value split pushing by herself or even with objectives. She can turn an objective into an absolute monstrosity by turning off the towers, making it really difficult to defend against. I'd say she has really good build diversity as well. You can kind of go the Windrunner dive build with arrow, or you can go more of a front to back remorseless build, maybe with a mind control. I think they're both really, really strong depending on what you need.
Yeah, I agree. I've always loved Sylvanas. Pretty much like the past 2, 3 years, I've been on teams. I've always recommended Sylvanas. I think she's super strong. She's been super strong. She kind of changes the game with her trait, like you said, turns off the buildings. Uh, no other hero can really do that effectively, so that's sort of a unique thing she has. She's also pretty much uncounterable. Her macro's insane, her team fight's insane. Both her ults, depending on the scenario, can win team fights for you. Wave clear is very strong. Team fight damage. She does pretty much everything. I'd probably put her in S tier.
Next, Tassadar. Gonna put him right along with the other no mobility mages. I think he's probably on average a little better than the rest of them. I think his range is longer and his wall can do some really cool things. But whereas Jaina has an ice block, KT has his shield, Gul'dan has his horrify if need be. Tassadar actually almost has nothing to defend himself except for that level 13 invisibility, which still isn't that great because you're only invisible for like a second and a half and then you're back again, and the enemies can still follow you and hit you while you're doing that. It makes him really, really, really hard to play into any kind of dive.
Yeah, that's the big downside to Tassadar is the dive. His wave clear is insane, which is like sort of the redeeming factor. You can do some cool things with force wall into like Diablo, for example. You can stun into the force wall. So he has like his cool little interactions, but yeah, the dive is just too punishing. So probably around D, maybe C tier.
I'll probably leave him C. I think he's around the same as the rest of these mages.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah.
I think the Butcher goes right to F. Uh, Pretty bad until you get your stacks. It's pretty easy for your enemy team to, deprive you of those in a team fight. It's really hard to play. If the enemy team has some lockdown, it's really hard to ever charge in and get out alive. I'd say Lamb to the Slaughter is a pretty strong ultimate. It just sucks that Cleanse negates it completely. I think the level 20 for Lamb to the Slaughter can be a game winner, but again, now you have a Butcher trying to get to level 20. It's going to be pretty hard.
Yeah, you pretty much said it all. I talked a lot about Butcher in the offlane video. Um, it just, I don't think he's very good. He has the point and click CC. He has Lamb to the Slaughter, like you said. At 20, he can win games, but the whole other 20 levels, you're trying to get stacks, but the team is, zoning you from getting the stacks, and you just don't really do much until you get them. So it's just a big mess. Definitely F tier, in my opinion.
Yeah, sucks for the Butcher. Thrall, I'd say, is the best bruisery flex DPS right now. Uh, his self sustain is insanely good. His damage to tanks is really, really good. If you go Ancestral level 7 and the percent damage 16, you can shred a lot of them really easily. If you get your root quest done at 4, then you've got very, very low cooldown engaged. You can just fish for them whenever you want. It's also really good peel. Um, Decent camp clear, kind of low wave clear, but that doesn't matter as much. And then just team fight damage really good, and also two really, really, really powerful ultimates.
Yep. Thrall's super strong, like you said. Both his ultimates are super good. He's very good into frontliners because you have the percent damage from your level 1 and the root at 16. You have a ton of roots with that root quest. You pretty much aren't at or in danger from like the generic bulliards like Genji, Tracer, Zeratul because you're just super tanky. You're very fast as well from the Wind Fury effect, and you can even turn on them with the root and chunk them out. So very strong hero. Uh, I'm probably leaning around B, maybe even A.
I'd be down to put him in B. I just want to kind of make the differentiation that Thrall's probably a bit better than Imperius right now, so I think I'll leave him in A.
Yeah, I think A is good.
Tracer, I'd probably put an A. I think she's the second best dive assassin, second to Genji. Only problem is Genji counters Tracer, so it seems a little awkward to put them on the same tier to me.
Yeah, I think Tracer is another extremely high skill cap hero if you're very good at her. Like Dino, for example, he'll he'll farm with her even into counters. If you're very good at her, you can do that. But yeah, there are a lot of counters like the Genji, like the Brightwing, like the Varian, where it's gonna be hard for you to really get value out of that unless you're like a absolute god at Tracer.
Yeah.
So probably A tier just because there are much more counters comparatively to the other S tier heroes.
Say she also just has a little bit less throughput as well than Genji, which is probably the closest we've got to compare her to.
Yeah, that's fair.
Tycus, I'd say A tier. He's just a really generally good DPS. He can shred frontliners with his minigun. His grenade build is super good poke and sustain damage even with the range, the CDR, all the talents combine really well together to make a killing machine. Odin, still one of the best ults in the game, especially at 20. Really tanky, so it's hard to go on a Tychus, which makes him a lot better. And then a little bit of mobility with dash is really good. Also, insane macro.
Yep, Tychus pretty much brings it all. Really, the only downside to Tychus is the blinds, the attack speed reduction, but even that, it's not unplayable, especially because you have like Odin, which you're gonna be doing lots of damage even if you're blinded or attack speed reductions. And
Hmm.
like you said, his macro is super strong, clears waves fast, very good at ganking as well with the minigun, good at damaging frontliners. And if you're not versus any of those counters, he's extremely strong. So yeah, probably I'd say around A or B.
Yeah, I think the only thing that sets him apart from S is he has relatively low range other than his grenade. And outside of Odin, it can be a little bit hard to play, especially if you get gone on. Odin's kind of a soft self cleanse because it gives you the unstoppable frames while it's setting up, which gives your team time to save you. But while Odin's down, you're more of a target, I'd say, and a little bit a little bit weaker than these other S tier in the team fight. Valeera, I'd say F. Um, we hardly see any Valeera players really. She's kind of difficult to play and really easy to punish. If you can ever knock her out of her stealth, then a lot of her viability goes down the drain. She has relatively low escape. Her only option is to try to get into stealth and hope that she can't get revealed out of it. Uh, really, really bad macro. Pretty difficult to play in team fights unless you can get a good one shot on someone in the backline, but that normally won't happen. Just not a very good hero right now.
I actually think Valeera's not too bad. Like you said, her macro really sucks, which is the big downside. I think she's very similar to Nova though, in the sense that she can gank very well. Um, Her burst damage is pretty good. But yeah, very niche hero. I think that if you're very good at her, in the right scenario, you can be pretty effective, especially on maps where like you're able to constantly roam and gank the offlaner, like Dragonshire, for example. I'd probably put her in D tier. I don't think she's a butcher by any means.
I think you make sense there. I think the comparison with Nova definitely changes my heart a little bit.
Just a very high skill cap hero. So you got to really play her a lot to get good at her.
Yeah. Vala, I'd probably put her A tier, and maybe B tier honestly. She's a pretty good DPS, but generally she's really really squishy. If you have a double support Vala comp, then she's gonna be really good. If granted there's no counters like a Mephisto against you, but without that, like additional protection, it's definitely difficult to stay alive, which makes her a little bit weaker than the other DPS above her, just because she has to have that condition fulfilled. But otherwise than that, she's got like decent macro, pretty high team fight damage. The mobility makes her a little bit safer, but again, that really small health pool just makes it a tad bit harder to play.
Yeah, I think Vala in terms of just like what she brings, she has very strong team fight damage. She can even have big burst damage with the Q build or even W build and auto build can bring good burst damage, but really strong sustained damage. Her macro is very good. On maps like BOE, her race is extremely strong. The one downside is she's very squishy. That's pretty much her only downside, which can be punished by a lot of heroes. Um, but I do think if you have a lot of protection, for example, like the classic, if you have a Zarya who can shield you, if you have an Uther who can heal you plus a double support, I think she can be extremely broken. The problem with that, and the reason she's sort of not picked too much in that style, is because there are big counters to that style, such as Mephisto, like you said, where it's Mephisto's just going to do more into that kind of style double support. So yeah, probably B tier in my opinion for that reason.
Next is Varian. I'm assuming this is not Taunt Varian, it's the other two archetypes, in which case I'd put him D tier. I think Twin Blades is pretty darn bad. Um, if the enemy team has CC or blinds, then it's really hard to get any value. Your damage throughput, while it's pretty decent consistency, it takes a long time to get it out. In which case, it's not feasible that you're just gonna be able to sit there and auto attack someone to death. So I'd say pretty bad. C Smash variant on the other hand, I think is maybe pickable into a Vala. Honestly, I think is probably its best place where you're just looking to absolutely one shot someone. Just go in, no regard for your own life, and try to one shot the enemy carry. But even at that point, no macro, really risky to your own life, which makes it a little hard to play around for your team. I'd say there's just a lot better choices for a DPS.
Yeah, considering this is a DPS tier list, I don't think Varian really fits that. I think if you're gonna go for that burst style, he's probably your tank, or maybe offlane if it's like a very specific map. But I just don't think it's very good. Uh, CC really messes with him if he's twin blades, blinds, and slows. I just don't think it really does enough. I'd probably put him in F tier personally, but we could do D tier if you have a little bit of copium.
Yeah, we'll hope that maybe he can one shot someone with a smash. Next is Zag. I think she's around C tier. Kind of the same problem as a lot of these mages, no mobility. Also, her very large hitbox makes it pretty dangerous against mages such as a Mephisto or a Chromie. You're just going to be getting hit by everything. But if you're into a lot of tanky characters, then your level 16 spike with the percent damage bugs is going to be very strong. She's got very good split push, pretty good macro. The vision from creep is also pretty useful on certain maps. But yeah, it's just really difficult to play into dive. Anything that can jump on you, it's hard to get away from.
Yeah, I think the thing that separates Zag from the other mages with low mobility is her range is extremely high.
Yeah.
You can really play very far back. The vision tool with creep is very strong. Ma can just win team fights. It's extremely strong ultimate. Percent damage once you scale up a little bit, get that 16% damage from the roaches is very strong. Even if you're not against a bunch of tanks, it's just insane damage. I think she's actually pretty good. There are the counters like Genji, like Zeratul, but if you're picking it later on in the draft when you know they can't pick those heroes, I'd probably put her in B tier.
Yeah, I think that just because that's such a constraint, C tier is probably a good place for her. But yeah, if you can last pick her, then she'll be really good into no counters. Zarya, I'd say around the same. We don't see her very often. She's kind of a rarer pick. She's a lot like a second support in a way that she can provide a lot of protection for her teammates. Um, Also very tanky herself, and if she can kind of just sit there and auto attack, she does really good damage by herself. As well as her ults being pretty strong, particularly Expulsion Zone. It's a really good CC tool that breaks a lot of the other boundaries that other CC doesn't, such as like the the way you can sort of stun lock someone into a wall with it, or just absolutely zone off an area, kind of like a Tyrael zone. But without the kind of proper comp that you need for her, she's going to be kind of weak. She has really low macro, and if you're not team fighting, then she'll have very low energy, which makes her just really weak in general.
Yeah, I think you pretty much said it all. I think Zarya has her niche in like a double support comp where she's buffing a hyper carry and doing good damage of her own as well. You got to be pretty good at her. Like for example, we have Ruto who's super good at her, is gonna be a very high prio pick for him.
Hmm.
But I do think her biggest downside is that there's like a lot of counters to her. For example, like most of the offlaners are pretty strong into her, like Blaze, Urel, Leoric, Hogger. All these heroes are gonna really punish her in team fights. So I think that's why her prio's gone down a lot. So probably C, maybe D tier, depending on who you are, who's
Yeah.
playing it.
Next is Zeratul. If you're Cure, then it's S tier, but if you're not Cure, then I think A tier is a decent place to put him. Uh, very, very mechanical hero, really difficult to play. But if you are able to play him and good with him, then he's going to get a lot of value. He's got really good build diversity. His auto attack build is insane for split pushing, insane for assassinating backliners. His Q build's really good AoE damage, and normally with Q build you go VP, which is one of the best ults in the game if you can combo it well. Uh, Lesser seen is his W build, which is more of a level 20 build, kind of a scaling one where you just try to one-shot someone from 100% HP. That one's probably a little less reliable, but I'd say his former two builds just make him really strong if you can play him well.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with their tool is there's a lot of counters. Any point and click is going to really punish him. So I think that's why I wouldn't consider him for S, just because there are a lot of pretty decent counters. But yeah, if you're playing him super well, definitely a strong hero. Um, Single target damage is very strong. If you go Q build DP, his AoE is pretty strong. A tier seems good, yeah.
And then last is Zul'jin. If you're hosty, then it's S tier, but if you're not hosty, I'd probably put it maybe C even. Really strong if you can facilitate his stacking, but if you can't do that, then his damage will be kind of low overall. His survivability is pretty bad until you get level 10, at which point you get Tazdingo. But even then, you're gonna die at the end of it unless you win the team fight. Really weak into blinds and auto attack slows, so if you're into a blaze, you're gonna have a rough time. Um, his macro is really bad, and yeah, I mean he's got really good damage, but you have to protect him really hard.
Yeah, I think of Zul'jin as kind of just a worse Vala.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to Kel'Thuzad and Butcher in the sense that you really have to get those stacks for him to be strong, and difference is, well, similar to Kel'Thuzad in the sense that the enemy team has to be willing to give you those stacks, and if they're not, if they just play passive and they macro, you're never going to get those stacks. So I think it has to be a very specific map for that. For example, like Tomb of the Spider Queen, they have to grab the gems, so there you can get your stacks. That can be a decent scenario. BOE, they have to walk up to hit the Immortal or defend the Immortal, so you can get your stacks there. But aside from those scenarios, I think uh, a good team's just not going to give you stacks, and if you don't have stacks, you don't do enough damage. So very situational, generally not very strong because the blinds really counter you, so probably D tier.
Uh, I mean, I'd love to put him there, but I just can't do it morally with who our coach is. So I'm gonna have to leave him at C.
Okay, okay.
Uh, well, with that ends our DPS tier list. Quite lengthy, but we did have a lot of heroes to go through. Uh, if you have any questions about these, or you think someone is where they shouldn't be, then go ahead and leave that in the comments. We'll try to respond to those. In the meantime, thank you for joining me, Liam. It's been a blast.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Glad we got to do this.
Yep, and that's all. Peace.
Yep, see ya.